Okay, guys, so we are on page 36 of this book, and you've got your papers there, so pull up your sheets. Sorry, I've got little puppies here that are kind of barking. The War of Exhaustion was slow. The North did not win it by a few knockout blows like Napoleon's defeat at the Battle of Waterloo. Rather, they won it by depriving and starving the South. As the struggle dragged on into its fourth year, European experts who had never seen this kind of war before began to think it was not war at all. One Prussian general sneered that he would not even study the battles of the war because they were nothing but the combats of two armed mobs. Another old world critic compared the North and South to two lunatics playing chess. Both knew a few moves, but neither understood the game. But this kind of war was not a game. The old rules of war that the generals had learned at West Point were no longer of much use. It was everyone's war with no holds barred. The winning generals turned out to be those like Ulysses S. Grant, who had never believed the old rules, or those like William T. Sherman, who were good at forgetting the rules. The long war was enough to try anybody's patience. Northern generals devised shortcuts. Of course, you could exhaust your enemy by cutting off his supplies, by wearing him down in one place after another. And that was Lincoln's strategy. He wanted to surround the South and cut it off from the world and the world's supplies. That way, the South eventually could not live. You could exhaust your enemy too, simply by destroying him, by burning his crops and houses and destroying his factories, by tearing up his railroads and blowing up bridges. Impatient Northern generals tried precisely this. On May 7, 1864, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman set out southeastward from Chattanooga, Tennessee, on a march of destruction. Going through Georgia, his army traveled light. He told his men to carry only their arms. He figured that they would loot food and supplies along the way, steal them. This, too, would help exhaust the enemy, but it also solved the problem of supply. Sherman ordered his troops to move fast without waiting to protect their rear. His army left a path of devastation 300 miles wide all across Georgia. What are you guys doing, puppies? Okay. All across Georgia. What was not worth carrying away, they burned. What they could not burn, they smashed. No, hey, stop. Sorry, I've got these two little puppies, and they just started causing problems as soon as I... Later, General Sherman explained that many people called humanity had no place in modern war. In the end, so his argument went, the only way to be humane, to get the war over, was to be cruel. The Confederate General Lee had warned his men that they should never hurt civilians. But Sherman argued you could not win that way. Northerner Philip H. Sheridan was so successful in battle that he was named a general when he was barely 30 years old. Sheridan claimed the only up-to-date strategy in war was to punish every enemy, man, woman, and child. Leave them nothing but their eyes to weep with. That was the new path to victory in this kind of warfare. It took 4 full years to exhaust the South. So in the past, right, it would just be a battle against two armies, but now they're saying we have to hurt the people that aren't even fighting in order to just get this done with. It took 4 full years to exhaust the South. If the North had not been so much stronger, it might have taken much longer. With 23 states against the South's 11, with 22 million people against the South's 9 million, the North had a big advantage. The North had more and better railroads, more ships, and more factories. I'm now on the top of page 37. Also, while the North had many labor-saving devices like the reaper to free men for the army, the South depended for its labor on black slaves. Now, I don't know what the reaper is, so I'm going to put a little video up after I'm done with this. Let me see if I can find real quickly what a reaper was. I'm not familiar with that. Reaper. What is the history of the reaper? A patent for the reaper. Mower reaper. Huh. Oh, okay. This is so I'll put up a little picture of this. It's something used in farming. Okay. So, and it looked like because it made farming easier, more men could go and fight, is what it is. So I'll put up a little picture of the Reaper. The South depended for its labor on black slaves. These might any moment turn out to be a fifth column, an enemy force behind the Southern lines, because they had very good reasons of their own to help the enemy. Every third Southerner was black. Southerners, therefore, lived in fear of a civil war all their own if their slaves ever decided to take up arms. So they had the slaves helping fight against the North who were trying to free them. Crazy. Meanwhile, the North decided in December of 1862 to accept blacks in its armed forces. When it did, more than 180,000 black men joined their ranks. The North grew many different crops that it could consume. The South, however, was glutted with just a few staples: tobacco, cotton, and rice. And those staples could not sustain them. The South had to export these crops in order to obtain anything else. So the North had all the food they needed. The South would have to export tobacco, rice, and cotton to get stuff in. Worst of all, the South suffered from delusions that prevented her from seeing facts. Southerners were astonished that any power on earth dared make war on the world's greatest producer of cotton. They had long told themselves that cotton was king. They imagined, too, that only Southerners were civilized and that one Southerner could whip a half dozen Yankees and not half try. The South, now remember, we don't have internet or any other way, so all they know is sort of the stories that people have told. The South's grandiose dreams turned into nightmares for everyone. In the North, too, however, it was everyone's war. There, too, nearly every family lost a soldier. And in quite new ways, the gore came into everyone's home. And that is because people were taking pictures of the battle. And I actually edited out another picture from your textbook of another person that had died in the Civil War. So there's real photographs now for the first time. So that had never happened before. So you could actually see pictures of people that had died. Civilians were able to read about the horrors every morning at breakfast. The New York Herald once had 40 correspondents in the field and spent $500,000 on them. Northern correspondents who would have been shot as spies if discovered smuggled themselves behind Southern lines disguised as women or Confederate soldiers. When Albert D. Richardson of the New York Tribune traveled through the South in 1861, he sent back his dispatches through a New York bank in code. So he sent his stories with a code so people didn't know what was going on. General Sherman was so irritated at the crowd of correspondents around his headquarters that he threatened to shoot them. General Grant was more amiable and used the correspondence to give people the news he wanted them to believe. Uh-oh. Oh, shoot. Puppies. Get out of here. Get out, get out. Get out. Go. Well, geez, sorry about that. My puppies. Oh, puppies. They figured out that they could get through, and now one's got my slipper. Oh my gosh. These puppies are getting kind of crazy. Sorry about that. Here, I'll show you all the puppies. Come here, puppy. Come here. Let me show you. Come here. Come here, puppies. You'll see who's causing all the problems on the video. These guys. These two widow munchkins are causing all the problems during my history video. I do not appreciate you two very much. You're causing a lot of problems. Okay, so go over there so I can finish reading them their history assignment. Don't cause any more problems. Ooh, baby. I went into my bedroom, and then I knocked the gate down trying to get to him. Okay. When some generals objected that the newspapers were giving away valuable information to the enemy, the New York World protested that this was a people's war. The pioneer photographer, Matthew Brady and his large crew, at the risk of their lives, sent photographs back home to show everyone the battle action. Soldiers sometimes ran away from Brady's camera because they had never even seen a camera before. They imagined it might be a new kind of gun. Soldiers called Brady's photographic buggy the "What is it?" and it served as a conspicuous target. On several occasions, Brady barely escaped being killed. After the first Battle of Bull Run, Brady was lost for 3 days before finding his way back to Washington. He quickly secured new equipment there and rushed back into the battlefield. There's a picture there on the bottom of page 38 that shows that this war has become the women's war as well, because they're needing women to be nurses, to sew things, to help with supplies, to pray, to write letters home, all these types of things. Women played a new important role. Dorothea, I think it's Dorothea Dix, the courageous New Englander. Oh my goodness gracious, these puppies. I'm sorry, they just got out. Hold on. No. Oh guys, this video is turning out to be very long because of these darn puppies. Hold on. They're going outside to their outside kennel. Give me a second. Let me throw them in there. I won't throw them. I'll set them. Hey guys, I need you guys to get you guys some water and put them in your kennel for me. I'm in the middle of a video. Okay, I got someone to babysit puppies. Oh baby, they were causing me some problems. Okay, so now we have the women. Dorothea Dix was a courageous New Englander. That's up in the New England area, like Massachusetts and that sort of area, who had braved public opinion to prevent cruelties to the insane. Now followed the example of the Englishwoman Florence Nightingale. Miss Dix became the first superintendent of Army nurses. She was a strict manager and enlisted only women who were strong and not too good looking. In those days, it took gumption to find any place for women in the Army, and she was the pioneer. Some women were so anxious to do their part in the war that besides nursing, at least 400 of them pretended to be male soldiers. I did not know that. My goodness, I never heard that before. Although it was everybody's war, the leaders did much to turn the tide. There is a good reason to ask, would the North still have won if Jefferson Davis had been president of the United States and Lincoln had been president of the Confederacy? Lincoln was a strong leader. As a politician, he knew how important it was in everybody's war to keep everybody's support. In late 1862, when the war was going badly for the North, he felt the time had come to show a great moral purpose for the war. He also wanted to try to secure foreign support. So on January 1, 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. And we watched a video of that in the previous lecture, okay? It declared that all slaves were free in the states that were rebelling against the United States. Slaves in the slave states that had stuck with the Union, Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri, weren't freed for another 2 or 3 years. Maryland slaves in November of 1864, Missouri's in January of 1865, and the slaves in Kentucky and Delaware on December 18, 1865, when the 13th Amendment was proclaimed. Just as the Declaration of Independence had helped unite the colonists and helped persuade France to support them in their fight against Britain, so the Emancipation Proclamation did its work. Mr. Lincoln's cause, wrote an English merchant on hearing of the proclamation, is just and holy, the cause of truth and of universal humanity. English working men held mass meetings to support the Union. Now there was little danger that the British government would recognize or support the Confederacy. This was no longer merely a war for the Union, but a war against slavery. Lincoln was not afraid of new ideas. He tried one general after another until he found Ulysses S. Grant. Of course, it was partly Lincoln's good luck that Grant happened to be there. But Lincoln was willing to try his luck on a general who usually looked a mess and did not insist on waging war according to the textbooks he had studied at West Point. Lincoln believed that a new world needed new ideas. General Grant agreed. He had a notion of how warfare had changed, and he had the advantage on the battlefield that he was a hard man to predict. After General Sherman's march of devastation through Georgia and the Carolinas, the South was still not quite defeated, but she was exhausted. She had no strength to go on. Then at last, when Union soldiers cut the railroad to the Confederate capital of Richmond, the Confederate government abandoned Richmond. In a final battle at Appomattox, General Grant overwhelmed Lee's force. On the afternoon of April 9, 1865, the Confederate General Lee, accompanied only by his military secretary, rode his horse to a little white house in the town of Appomattox Courthouse on the Appomattox River in central Virginia. He went to arrange his surrender. And one of the most remarkable and most encouraging episodes in American history occurred there. It showed that, despite the monstrous indecencies of wars, Americans on opposite sides of the battle could still respect one another. Grant, who had just come in from the field, was dusty and even more unkempt than usual. Confronting him in the living room of the house he had taken for his headquarters was General Lee, handsome, erect, in a spotless uniform and wearing his dress sword. The men sat down and then exchanged recollections of their fighting together 20 years before in the Mexican War. The two great generals talked to each other with calmness, courtesy, and respect. Now that the fighting was over, it seemed that humanity had suddenly returned. Lee heard Grant's terms of surrender. Grant was more generous than he needed to be. He allowed Southern officers to keep their swords, the symbols of their honor, and he allowed officers and men to keep their horses so they could go home and plant their crops. Lee was touched. This, he said, will have a very happy effect upon my army. A renewed nation, fused in the fires of war, would now seek its destiny in peace. And there's a picture there on the bottom on April 9th, 1865, as they agree to surrender, and the South has lost, and the war is finally going to be over. Okay, so a couple of quick questions. On page 36, they called, I don't remember them saying the word the Conda, but the northern blockade of supplies to the South was called the Conda. And they said that's on page 36. Okay, that was actually from last time, but I guess I read it with the previous lecture. It says, the War of Exhaustion hit everyone in the South, civilians as well as military. The same ships that would have brought arms and ammunition to the armies also would have brought machinery for the factories and food, clothing, and medical supplies for all. The northern blockade against the South worked slowly, but it worked surely. People called it the Conda after the anaconda, which was the huge boa constrictor snake that kills its prey by squeezing. Lincoln's strategy against the South. It says, what was Lincoln's strategy against the South? What did some impatient northern generals do to the South? So Lincoln's strategy was to cut off the South from the world, including access to supplies. But some northern generals tried to exhaust the South by burning crops and houses, destroying factories, tearing up railroads, and blowing up bridges. How did Union generals Sherman and Grant handle newspaper correspondence differently? Sherman was irritated them. Grant was friendlier, and he used the correspondence to give people the news he wanted them to believe. So it wasn't necessarily true news, correct? How did the Emancipation Proclamation serve as a good strategy for Lincoln? Well, it provided a great moral purpose for the war. So, hey, this is why we're doing it. We're going to free the slaves. It helped keep Britain from backing the Confederacy, since Britain also, by this time, thanks to Wilberforce, opposed slavery. And how did Generals Lee and Grant treat one another upon the defeat? They were very kind to each other, right? Some important points here, and Zoe, I think you're doing your stickers as well. The first Battle of Bull Run was 1861. Admiral Farragut captures New Orleans in 1862. The Union permits black men to fight in its army in 1862. The Emancipation Proclamation was January 1, 1863. Sherman's March to the Sea was 1864. Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to end the war in 1865. Appomattox, those are just some locations, right, that were there. And so this week, too, we're going to be memorizing the Pledge of Allegiance. I hope most of you have done this already, but you're going to get to do that this week. And I'd like everybody to be prepared in class on Monday to be able to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.